Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you're not a general, not a senator, not even a half-forgotten emperor with delusions of legacy. You're a Roman peasant, if that word still means anything. You were born long after the glory days, when the aqueducts still ran clear and the roads didn't crumble beneath your feet. Now, your roof leaks, your tunic itches like betrayal, and the only things that arrive on time are taxes and bad news. Before the gods vanish entirely, and they will, do me a small favour. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I always enjoy hearing who's listening to the show from around the world. And if you'd like early access to more bleak little bedtime stories like this one, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You're born in a village the maps forgot, if they ever knew it. A cluster of crooked huts slumped along a muddy road, somewhere between the hills and a river that floods every spring and dries out every summer. The nearest town used to matter once. You're told it was called something important, something with a statue and a marketplace, and men who wore purple sashes. But by the time you arrive squalling into the world, the statue's missing its head, the marketplace is full of weeds, and the men in sashes are either dead or pretending to be farmers. The empire still exists, technically, but it doesn't extend out this far, not anymore. The first thing you learn is that everything is damp. The floor of your home is more swamp than dirt. Your blankets smell like mildew, and the roof, carefully thatched by your grandfather's grandfather, has long since declared war on your comfort. When it rains, you feel it from 5 different directions. When it doesn't, you're still wet. The fleas arrive early and stay late. You scratch in your sleep. By the time you're old enough to string words together, you've developed a kind of persistent cough that never fully leaves. It's not a sickness, not exactly. It's just what your lungs do here. Your mother is tired. That's not an insult. It's simply the permanent state of things. She moves like someone carrying water, even when she's empty-handed. Her days are filled with boiling grains into glue, chasing rats away from the drying fish and muttering prayers to whichever god still seems interested in listening. Most of them aren't. The family altar holds a cracked figurine of Fortuna and a faded scrap of wood that may have once been Jupiter. Or a spoon, no one's quite sure anymore. Still she lights the oil lamp. Still she kneels. Your father, on the other hand, remembers, or claims to. He was born closer to a time when Rome meant something, when a road meant connection, not robbery, when the army wore matching boots. He talks about the empire the way men talk about an old lover, wistful, angry, unable to let it go. Sometimes he calls Rome a miracle, sometimes he calls it a mistake. Either way, he speaks of it like a dying god. Half worship, half curse. Once, he says, a magistrate came through your village in a fine robe with clean sandals and parchment. Now, if a stranger shows up, it's more likely to be a deserter or a thief. Or both. You learn Latin like you learn hunger, by necessity. No one speaks it purely anymore. Not even the village priest. He mixes it with something older, something local, the way bread is stretched with barley husks to make it last. You hear stories about Greeks, about Gauls, about Ethiopians and Persians and gods who walked among men, but they feel like tales told to pass the time. Not history, not truth. You believe more in the mud between your toes than in anything that happened in golden palaces far away. You never meet a census taker, but taxes still arrive, always. A man in patchwork armour and missing teeth comes once a year with a slate and a vague sense of entitlement. He doesn't ask how many live in the house or whether any of them are dead now. He just points at the grain sacks and waits. If there's no grain, he takes chickens. If there are no chickens, he takes something else. One year, he takes your uncle. Just for a while, he says. Just until the quotas are met. Your uncle doesn't come back. Your days blur. There's no school, no calendar, no certainty. You measure time in harvests and funerals, in how long the bread takes to go sour, or how many people cough through the winter. Once, a travelling merchant passes through with a piece of glass he claims came from Constantinople. He lets you touch it for a boiled egg. You stare into your reflection, mud-streaked, flea-bitten, vaguely human, and feel for a moment that you're part of something vast. Then he takes the glass and leaves, and the feeling goes with him. You grow, slowly, crookedly. You learn to plant and reap and carry and mend. You learn not to ask questions, because the answers are usually disappointing. Why is the road broken? Why don't the soldiers protect us? Why do we call ourselves Roman when nothing about this life feels like marble or glory? Your father tells you it's still better than being a barbarian. You're not sure that's true. By the time you're old enough to shoulder a hoe and pretend it's a spear, you've come to a quiet conclusion. You've never seen a clean road, never met a well-fed magistrate, never tasted proper wine. Rome is a word people say when they don't know what else to hope for. It's a name carved into crumbling stone, half buried in vines and bird droppings. The cracks have been there longer than you've been alive, and you're starting to suspect that no one remembers how to fix them. You're maybe 8, maybe 9, no one knows for sure. Your family stopped tracking ages when the last clay tablet cracked in the frost, but you're old enough to carry a pail without spilling too much, and old enough to be sent out in the mornings to gather kindling. So you're old enough to remember the day the soldiers came. It was just after planting season, when the air still smelled faintly of wet earth and not yet of mould. The goats were still healthy then. The roof had only one major leak. Things were, by local standards, good, which meant they were just barely tolerable. You hear them before you see them, metal on metal, hooves on stone, voices raised not in song or command, but in argument. Your first thought is excitement. Soldiers mean news, right? Maybe they'll bring letters or orders or salt. Maybe they'll chase away the thieves who've been creeping around the fields at night, trying to steal grain that hasn't even ripened. Maybe they'll stay a while and tell stories about the emperor and the capital and the sea. You run to tell your mother. She doesn't look up from her grinding stone. When they arrive, you feel your stomach drop. These aren't the proud legionnaires your father talked about. They don't march in formation. They limp. Their armour is mismatched if they're wearing any at all. One man has a helmet strapped together with twine. Another wears no shoes. Their swords are spotted with rust, and their horses look worse than your goats. You're not sure they're soldiers at all until one of them barks something about requisitioning supplies and waves a wooden token painted with faded red letters. Your mother squints at it like it might bite her. They're led by a man with half a nose and a voice like gravel. He says they've been sent by the local governor, or maybe the bishop, or someone. The name keeps changing, and no one writes anything down. He says Rome needs grain, that the barbarians are pressing from the north, and the army must be fed if civilization is to stand. Your mother nods slowly, kneels by the hearth, and begins slicing what's left of the winter's bread into even thinner pieces. She wraps one in a cloth, hands it to him with both hands, and asks if the soldiers might watch the road a few days in exchange. He doesn't answer. He just takes the bread and hands it to the man with no shoes, who devours it in 4 bites and drops the cloth in the mud. They take the rest too. The grain sack hidden beneath the bench, the jar of pickled onions, the string of dried fish you forgot was hanging in the rafters. One man eyes your sister, but your father steps in then and mutters something sharp. The man laughs and spits on the floor. You try to make yourself smaller. That night, the soldiers set up camp just beyond the village well. They don't post a guard. No one would be stupid enough to attack them, and they clearly don't expect help from their own side. They drink from cracked skins and pass around a single lump of something that might once have been cheese. Your father watches from the doorway with crossed arms. He says nothing. Your mother quietly locks the goat pen. The next morning, a fight breaks out between 2 of them. over a chicken. Not your chicken, thankfully. That was taken hours earlier. You hear the scuffle, then a scream, and then nothing. When you sneak out later, you see the body, barely covered with a cloak, left behind like an afterthought. The others don't bury him. They don't even speak his name. You wonder if they knew it. They leave just before midday. No fanfare, no thanks. The man with half a nose climbs onto his horse, if you can still call it that, and tells your father he's lucky. Says they've seen villages with nothing left but bones and smoke, that your hut still has walls. It's hard to tell if it's a warning or a compliment. Maybe it's both. Before they go, one of them unties the rope to your last goat and slings it over his shoulders like a sack of barley. He doesn't ask. He doesn't look at you. You watch the goat disappear down the road, bleating softly, until the sound fades into the dust. Your mother doesn't cry. She just walks back into the hut and starts sweeping the crumbs off the table like they matter. Your father says nothing, but that night you hear him whispering something to the fire. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse, maybe both. You don't forget the soldiers, not because they were brave, not because they were noble, but because they made it perfectly clear. Rome still has an army, just not for you. By the time you're old enough to call yourself a man, though no one throws you a feast, gives you a toga, or even mentions it, you've begun to notice just how much your world has shrunk. The town, if it still qualifies as one, has changed. Not all at once, not in some dramatic collapse with flames and screams, and heroic last stands. That would almost be a kindness. No, it's been dying the way trees rot, quietly, from the roots upward. The gates still stand, but they're splintered. The market still opens, but only on every third day, and only if the weather's good. Half the stalls are gone. The other half pretend not to recognise you when you ask for credit. The roads into town used to be stone. You've seen the pieces, half buried, crooked, worn down like old teeth. Now it's mostly weeds and mud, and sometimes, when the rains are bad, it's a river. You once asked your uncle why no one fixes the road. He laughed until he coughed up something yellow and sticky. Who would we send the complaint to? He asked, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. The emperor? You laughed too, but not because it was funny. Your village still calls itself Roman. The town still flies the eagle. Someone even went to the trouble of painting it back on the crumbling stone arch after the last flood washed it off. But the eagle looks tired, crooked, one wing bigger than the other, eyes too wide, like it's been startled out of retirement. You still say Rome like it means something. But more and more, it feels like a habit, like you're scratching at a scar that's already healed wrong. You start to notice the coins, or what's left of them. They used to have faces, you're told. Names, emperors. You hold one up in the light, and all you see is a smudge and a dent. Half the weight, twice the rust. Merchants argue over which coins are real and which are forgeries, and more than once, you've seen someone bite into one like it's meat. Just to be sure. No one agrees on what anything is worth. A loaf of bread costs 2 bronze one day, 5 the next, then a chicken the day after. One man tries to pay with a coin from Gallienus. The baker throws it in the mud. The town scribe died last year. No one replaced him. The records stopped getting updated, but no one noticed for months because the only people who could read were either dead, drunk, or in the church. You try to remember the names of the emperors you've heard in your lifetime, but they slip around in your head like eels. One died in battle. One was poisoned by his cook. One converted to Christianity, then converted back when his crops failed. You're not sure if half of them ever actually ruled anything, or just shouted loud enough to make it seem like they did. The empire, if it still breathes, is being run by a dozen men in different cities who all think they're in charge. Like watching a rowboat full of captains argue while the tide pulls them out to sea. There are no new buildings. The old ones just collapse slower than the people do. The temple's roof gave out 2 winters ago. No one fixed it. The bathhouse is used for storage now, mostly tools and firewood. You went there once as a child when it still worked, and for a moment you thought maybe Rome wasn't dead yet. The steam, the marble, the old man explaining the gods. But that was years ago, and the gods have stopped talking. Or maybe you've stopped listening. There's still law, sort of. If you steal something obvious and someone important notices, you'll get a beating. If you kill a man in front of a priest, you might be fined. But mostly, people settle things with shouting, fists, or silence. The village elder can barely stand upright anymore, but he's still the one who resolves disputes, mostly because he's too old to be afraid of consequences. Once, someone claimed to be a tax collector, waving a faded scroll with an imperial seal. The villagers took one look at him, saw the patches on his shoes, and sent him away with an empty sack and a cracked rib. You keep waiting to see a real Roman official, someone in robes, someone with a badge and authority and the ability to make the world feel slightly less broken. But the only people who ever arrive from the outside are beggars, bandits, or men in mismatched armour trying to remember who they're supposed to be loyal to this month. You start to wonder if the officials are like the gods, once powerful, now reduced to names spoken out of habit. One day, you walk past the old forum, now overgrown with brambles and goat droppings, and you realise something simple and terrible. You've never seen a real Roman official? Not once, not in your whole life. You've seen forgeries, pretenders, half-starved soldiers, and self-appointed taxmen. But no real governors, no tribunals, no imperial messengers on horseback bearing scrolls stamped with wax. Just shadows, rumours, ghosts in threadbare cloaks. And yet, you still call yourself Roman. You're not sure why. You wake before dawn the way you always do. Not because of any particular obligation. No one clocks in around here. But because the cold has settled into your bones, and sleep never stays long. The skies are bruised grey and the frost on the inside of the shutters hasn't melted from yesterday. You pull on the same tunic you've worn for 3 years, now patched at the shoulders and threadbare at the knees, and step outside to fetch water. The air smells like wet wood and fatigue. You notice it almost immediately. The baker's window is shut. That might not sound like much, but for as long as you've been alive, he's always been up before everyone else. Even when his flour was more chaff than wheat. Even when his hands shook from cold or age or something worse. The little clay shutter on the side of his hut would be open before the sun even blinked over the hills, letting out curls of smoke and the first scent of flatbread or ash cakes or whatever he could conjure that morning. And people would come, not for the bread, no one's eaten real bread in years, but for the comfort of pretending things still functioned. You give it an hour, then 2, still nothing. A few others gather outside his door, arms crossed, heads tilted. No one knocks. No one wants to be the one to confirm it. Eventually the eldest son walks up, mutters something about bad luck, and nudges the door open with a stick. A minute passes. Then he walks back out, closes the door behind him, and says nothing. Just shakes his head once and keeps walking. That's the whole announcement. That's the obituary. The baker is dead. You're not surprised. Not really. His children left weeks ago. Headed south, they said, to where the grain still grows and the soldiers still carry shields instead of begging bowls. They begged him to come too, but he said he couldn't leave. This street needs bread, he told them. He believed it, right up until the morning he didn't open the shutter. People whisper that he starved, others say he was sick. One man insists it was grief, which is just another word for the body giving up when there's nothing left to take. No one suggests burying him. It's not because they don't care. It's just that everyone's already behind on everything. On planting, on roof mending, on surviving. And no one wants to be the one who touches a corpse when you don't know what killed it. By the end of the day, someone boards up the door with an old shutter and a few nails. You suspect they were more interested in keeping animals out than showing respect. The bread window stays shut, and soon dust begins to gather in the corners. You make a habit of walking past slower now, as if the stillness inside might change if you give it enough time. It doesn't. That weak barter becomes harder. Coins are no longer welcome, not even the good ones. The few traders who still pass through want wool, salt, beans, tools, things that exist and don't lie. A neighbour tries to trade a bag of coins for 3 onions and gets laughed at. You hear him cursing under his breath the whole walk home, a sack full of worthless metal banging against his hip. You keep your own coins tucked in the corner of your bedding, not because you think they'll ever be useful again, but because they're round and familiar and don't rot, unlike everything else. Salt becomes sacred. It always was in theory, but now it's holy. People treat it like relics, trading pinches like gold, hoarding crumbs in jars like ashes of saints. Your aunt gives a single fingertip's worth of it to the local midwife and receives a pot of boiled lentils in return. You taste it just once, and for the first time in weeks, you feel something close to warmth. You consider stealing more, but from whom? A neighbour dies. Not the baker, another one. An old man who used to mend boots. You didn't know his name. No one does anymore. He used to sit by the fountain and grumble about taxes and rats, and now he's lying curled in the alley behind the blacksmith's hut. Jaw slack, one hand wrapped around nothing. He doesn't look peaceful, just empty, like something went out and forgot to take the body with it. You wait for someone to come. A priest, a healer, a messenger, but no one does. There's no ceremony, no procession. After 2 days, the smell forces a few men to drag him out of the alley and dig a shallow trench beyond the town wall. They don't say a prayer. They don't mark the grave. One of them mutters that he's probably better off now. You're not sure if it's meant to be comforting or jealous. That night, you lie awake listening to the wind scrape against the shutters, and you think about the baker's window, still closed, still silent, and you wonder who'll be next, not in a dramatic, fearful way, just practically, like crossing names off a list. The town is quieter now. The bread is gone. The smoke doesn't rise in the morning, and for the first time, you understand what it means to see a corpse in the street and to keep walking. You decide to try your luck, not because you're especially hopeful, but because staying still has started to feel like a slow form of dying. The storage pot holds a small surplus of grain, barely a basket's worth, and you've heard that the next town over has a blacksmith who still trades fairly. Maybe you'll come back with a tool, a knife, a wedge of dried meat, something solid enough to prove that effort still counts for something. You pack carefully. The sack is slung over one shoulder, tied twice. You carry a staff, not for show, but for balance, and if it comes to it, for swinging. You wear your father's belt, cracked and curling at the edges, and your brother's old boots. The left one still leaks. You kiss your mother's forehead, nod to your father, and step onto the road as the sun rises pale and watery through a veil of mist. The first thing you notice is how quiet it is. No carts, no travellers, no noise beyond birds and wind, and the occasional groan of a tree, leaning a little farther into ruin. The road used to be paved, you've heard stories. Now it's more mud than anything else, eaten away by rain and roots, with weeds clawing up through every crack. You trip once and catch yourself on a stone that looks suspiciously like a fallen milestone. The inscription is worn smooth. No one's cleaned them in years. You pass 2 traders headed in the opposite direction. They look hollow. One has a wrapped bundle that leaks red from the corner. You try not to look too long. They don't greet you. One just mutters something about bandits and keeps walking. The other has a knife strapped to his forearm. More rust than steel, and he keeps his hand on it the whole time you pass. Closer to the river, you see the remains of a villa. You didn't know the family, but your father said they used to be wealthy. Romans, proper ones, with slaves and imported wine and a tiled floor. Now it's just a burned out husk. One wall still stands, with scorched ivy clawing up its side, like it's trying to hold it in place. The inside smells like wet ash and something worse. You don't go in, but as you pass the crumbled entrance, You see bones, blackened, curled, still wearing rings. You reach the outskirts of the next town around dusk. It's not what you remember. The outer wall is cracked, and the gate is unmanned. A few dogs scatter when you walk in, ribs visible through matted fur. People move quickly here, furtive shapes between half-closed doors and shuttered stalls. You find the blacksmith eventually. He's still working in a way, just not for grain. He wants salt, or wool, or failing that, news. You offer what you've brought, and he snorts. Grain, he says. You think I need more mouths to feed? You point out it's clean, dry, not rat-bitten. He shrugs. Says his cousin's child died last week, from grain that looked just like yours. No one trusts anything anymore, he mutters. Not even bread. You try a few other stalls. A weaver offers you a single spool of thread in exchange. A fishmonger laughs in your face. Eventually, a man with ink-stained fingers offers half a loaf of something that may have started as barley and a single copper coin clipped almost to nothing. You hesitate, but your feet are tired, your stomach is loud, and your pride's not worth much these days. You take the deal. On the way back, it starts to rain. Not a storm, just that thin, steady drizzle that seeps through every seam in your clothing and turns mud to soup. You slip once and catch yourself. Your sack landing in a puddle. The loaf is wet now. You don't care. You chew it slowly as you walk. It tastes like damp wood and defeat. You pass the villa again, but you don't look this time. Farther down the road, near the bend where the old orchard used to be, you see something lying across the ditch. At first, you think it's a bundle of rags. Then you see the shape of a hand. It's a soldier, or what's left of one. His armour is in pieces. One boot is missing. Flies cling to the corner of his mouth. You feel your pulse quicken. Not because of the body, you've seen worse by now, but because something near his waist glints faintly in the wet light. You step closer. It's a knife. The hilt is wrapped in worn leather cord, dyed a faint red. You recognise the cord. You remember your mother sitting by the hearth 2 winters ago, twisting that same thread around the handle while your brother packed his things. So it doesn't slip in the rain, she'd said. You stare at it for a long time. The blade is rusted. The hand that once held it is curled, shriveled. The face is too far gone to tell. You don't know if it's really him, but you know the knife, and that's enough. Eventually, you keep walking. When you return home, the sun is gone, and so is the warmth in your limbs. Your mother asks what you brought. You hold up the coin, then the thread. She doesn't say anything, just takes them and sets them aside. The bread you saved for her is soggy, but she eats it anyway. No one mentions your brother. You went looking for value. You came back with less than you brought, and somehow that still feels like a kind of luck. Rumours arrive faster than bread. They come in the mouths of travellers, drifters, tradesmen with nothing left to trade. No one brings salt anymore. No one brings tools. What they bring is names, heavy ones, half-spoken like curses. Vandals, Goths, Alans, Hungarians, names that taste foreign and sharp, like cold iron and burned meat. Each story contradicts the last. The invaders are coming from the north. No, from across the sea. They've already taken the capital, or maybe it was just a smaller town that no one remembers the name of. Either way, they're coming. Or they've already been. Or maybe they were never real to begin with. You learn not to ask too many questions. No one knows anything for sure, and those who claim they do are usually the most desperate to believe it. The baker's cousin says the Vandals drink blood and ride horses made of bone. The old woman who sells onions swears the Goths tear down temples and salt the ground. Your uncle mutters that none of them are worse than Rome itself, and he's probably not wrong. Still, the fear hangs heavy. It's not a sharp panic. It's dull like mildew, something that settles into the fabric of life and refuses to leave. The bishop returns from the provincial seat, or what's left of it. He used to come once a year for baptisms and to remind everyone of their duties. Now he visits every few weeks, riding a tired mule and looking like he hasn't slept since the last emperor fell. He preaches longer now, louder, less about salvation and more about sin, less about God's mercy and more about his wrath. He warns that judgment is coming, that the earth is being scoured clean of the impure. When you ask who counts as impure, he just looks at you like you should already know. The local priest, the one who used to bless the fields and deliver dried herbs to your mother when your cough got bad, stops showing up altogether. Some say he left in the night. Others say the bishop sent him away for being too soft. A boy claims to have seen him on the road heading east, walking fast, not looking back. You check the chapel one evening and find it dark. The door is bolted. The altar's been stripped bare. The offering bowl is gone. People begin to leave. Not in great waves, just one family at a time, like loose stones slipping from a crumbling wall. Your cousin is among them. She joins a caravan headed south, chasing rumours of stable cities and quiet farmland. She hugs your mother goodbye, promises to write. You never hear from her again. Maybe she made it, maybe she didn't. The outcome matters less than the fact that she's gone. Her house is empty now. Vines creep through the cracks in the shutters. The thatch on the roof sags lower each week. The nights grow quieter. The usual background of arguments, coughing fits, and babies crying fades until the silence becomes its own kind of noise. You stop recognising the faces you pass on the road. You can't tell if it's because there are too many strangers or because the people you grew up with look too different now. Worn down, hollowed out. Your mother says the air feels wrong. She lights a lamp and mutters a prayer to a god she no longer names. Your father says nothing, but he's been sharpening the same dull blade every evening, as if something might still need killing. One afternoon, the village elder gathers everyone by the old fountain, the one that still coughs up water when the pipes remember how to work. He doesn't speak loudly. He doesn't need to. His voice carries in the brittle stillness. He says the roads are no longer safe, that the last merchant caravan was found half burned, the wagons splintered, the horses stripped to bone. He says we have two options, pray harder or leave. Those are the choices now, prayer or movement, stillness or risk. Someone asks where we're supposed to go. He shrugs. South maybe, or east, away from wherever the next story says the raiders are. He admits he doesn't know what's true anymore. He just knows what's left. You think about leaving, you think about staying. Both feel like different ways of surrendering, but one means walking into the unknown. The other means watching the known rot in place. That night, you lie awake again. You count the gaps between the sounds outside. There used to be so many. Dogs, footsteps, children fighting over scraps. Now it's wind, just wind. It moves through the empty houses and stirs the brittle shutters. And if you listen long enough, it almost sounds like bells. Not real ones, not from a church, just echoes of something that used to matter. You try to sleep, but every dream smells like smoke. You wake to the smell before anything else. Not the usual mix of wet straw and cold ash, but something sharper, thicker, smoke. Not the kind from a cooking fire either. This smoke scratches its way down your throat before you're fully upright. You cough hard, eyes already watering, and stumble to your feet. Your mother is already moving, grabbing a cloth and pressing it to her face. Your father's at the door, unmoving, staring through the cracks in the wood. When you ask what's happening, he doesn't answer. He just reaches for the short-handled axe and doesn't look back. You open the shutter and see it. Not a single plume, but a sky gone yellow-grey with smoke. It drifts like fog across the hills, heavy and low, curling around rooftops and into doorways. You hear shouting, not commands, not the bark of orders from a disciplined formation. These are angry, loose voices, some high and panicked, others low and animal. There's no drumbeat, no banners, no formation, just fire. And people with weapons they clearly made themselves. It's not an army, You've heard tales of Roman discipline, of coordinated marching, gleaming helmets, rows of spears. This is nothing like that. This is a mob. Men with sticks, blades, torches, clubs, bows if you're lucky, rusted nails hammered into wood if you're not. They move like dogs let off the leash. You don't know what language they're shouting in. It doesn't matter. You understand the meaning. They're here for what's left, which admittedly isn't much. You see flames licking the roof of the cooper's hut, then jumping to the thatch of the next one. You hear the crackling, slow at first, then all at once, like someone snapping dry reeds beneath a boot. Someone screams. It doesn't carry as far as you'd expect. It gets swallowed by the smoke, or by the sheer size of the sky, or maybe just by the fact that no one really wants to hear it. You feel your hands shaking and force yourself to move. Your family doesn't wait to see who the attackers are. That luxury is for the rich or the dead. Your father throws open the root cellar and starts handing down the food stores, not because he thinks they'll spare your hut, but because the idea of losing the last sack of barley is somehow worse than losing the house. You and your sister carry down jars, tools, blankets. Your mother follows with the little statue of Fortuna that no one really believes in anymore, but still feels wrong to leave behind. You're about to climb down yourself when you stop. You smell it. Wheat, burning. It takes you a moment to place it. The scent is almost sweet at first, like toast left too long in the flame. Then it changes, deepens, curdles, fills your nose and lungs with something hot and rotten. You realise it's your wheat, the small field just beyond the orchard, barely more than a patch really. It took you 2 months to clear the rocks from it last year. Now it's on fire. You can't see the flames yet, but you don't have to. The temptation to run out there, to stop it somehow, seizes your chest like a cramp. You take one step toward the doorway before your father grabs you by the collar and hauls you bodily down into the cellar. The trapdoor slams shut above you, and the last thing you see is a flicker of orange on the horizon. The cellar is cramped, barely dug out. Damp earth presses in from all sides, and the ceiling is so low you can't stand. You sit huddled between sacks of grain and a pile of chipped tools, pressed against your sister's bony shoulder. Your mother's hands are clenched around her rosary. Or maybe it's just a string of beads. It's hard to tell in the dark. Above you, the sounds are muffled but clear enough. Splintering wood, shouting, the hiss of something wet hitting something hot. You try not to imagine which part of town is going up next. You try not to guess which scream belonged to whom. There's a moment of silence, and another scream. Then something heavy falls, shaking dirt from the ceiling and into your hair. You flinch. Everyone does. You begin to pray, not because you believe it will help, but because it's the only thing left to do. You mumble half-remembered Latin under your breath, words you barely understand, stitched together from overheard sermons and childhood chants. You feel ridiculous, but you do it anyway. You ask the God you don't trust to let the mob move past, to leave enough of the village standing to matter, to spare your family, if not your home, to at least leave the well. You promise things you know you can't keep, vows of purity, of sacrifice, of obedience. You say you'll stop swearing. You say you'll go to temple more. You say you'll try to believe. You wait until the shouting fades, until even the rats stop moving above you. Then you wait a little longer, because no one wants to be the first to find out if it's really over. The cellar feels smaller by the hour. The air tastes like soil and sweat and panic, and there's barely enough space to stretch your legs. Your sister sleeps in bursts, jerking awake at every noise. Your father holds the axe across his lap, like a prayer. Your mother doesn't move at all. When you finally unlatch the door and push it open, it sticks slightly, like the wood above has begun to sag. You shoulder it up and crawl out into a world you almost don't recognise. The air is thick and sour. Ash drifts across the yard like snow, soft and silent. You cough hard. The taste lingers in your throat. Your eyes sting. The village is still here, technically. but most of it is smoke and bones. The buildings are blackened skeletons, some still faintly smouldering. The roofs collapsed in on themselves, like broken ribs. The well still stands, though no one goes near it. The bucket lies beside it, half melted, the rope charred through. You already know it's poisoned. Someone must have tried to use it too soon. You don't know how many people are left. The streets are nearly empty. Those who remain move like ghosts, silent, slow, heads down. You pass 3 people, and none of them speak. One man walks straight past his own home without looking at it. A woman stands barefoot in the middle of the road, holding a burnt bowl to her chest, like it still has food in it. You find a corpse behind the old cooper's hut. A woman, face down in the dirt, arms stretched toward the doorway. Her skin is blistered, her dress blackened and curled around her legs. You don't know her name, but you recognise the woven bracelet on her wrist. Green and blue thread, the kind sold by the travelling peddler last spring. Her hand is clenched around something. You crouch. It's a cloth pouch, scorched at the edges. You pry it loose. Inside, 3 copper coins, a twist of dried salt, and a scrap of bread turned to charcoal. You take all of it. Your stomach aches, but you don't eat any of it yet. You just stand there a moment longer, staring at the body. You don't cry, you don't feel much at all, just cold despite the heat still clinging to the ground. No one says anything. No one asks what you found. The survivors don't look at each other, don't speak. They move past the dead the way they move past rubble or livestock. Another piece of the wreckage. Grief takes time, and time is the one thing no one has. You return home to find part of the roof collapsed. The firewood is soaked through. Half your tools are gone, taken or burned or buried under debris. But the walls are standing, and that's more than most can say. Your mother sweeps ashes from the doorway in silence. Your father is sharpening his axe, though the blade is so chipped it barely holds an edge. Your sister sleeps again, curled around her knees like she's trying to disappear into herself. That night, you lie awake listening to the wind blow through the cracks in the wall. The village is quieter than it's ever been. No dogs, no arguing, no coughing babies, just the soft crunch of broken things settling into ruin. At first light, your neighbour calls for help. You nearly ignore him, but his voice isn't panicked. It's quiet, flat, empty in the way people get when they've stopped hoping anyone will come. That's what makes you go. You find him outside the shell of his house, shirt torn, eyes raw. He's digging, not fast, just steadily. A shallow grave, just beyond the edge of the yard. His daughter is wrapped in a blanket beside the hole. Her hand sticks out from beneath it, small and soot-smudged. You don't ask what happened. You don't need to. You pick up the second shovel and start to dig. The earth is dry and packed hard from the heat. It fights back. Stones catch the blade. Your hands blister. He doesn't speak the entire time, and neither do you. When the hole is ready, he lifts her in gently and lays her down like she's sleeping. Then he places a small clay figure beside her, one of her toys. You remember her holding it during temple services, pretending it was a soldier. You fill the grave together, pat it down with both hands. No marker, just dirt. Just enough to cover memory. He nods once, then walks away. You stand alone in the smoke, ash clinging to your skin, breath caught in your chest. The gods didn't come. The Empire didn't help. No one sent soldiers. No one sent priests. There's just you and a shovel, and the smell of everything burned. They arrive the way thunder does, loud, unwelcome, and always after the damage is already done. You hear them before you see them, hooves striking what's left of the road, boots trudging through ash, voices barking orders no one bothers obeying. The army, they call themselves. What's left of it, Rome's shield, arriving just in time to stand guard over cinders. You watch them ride in with what might once have been ceremony. A rusted standard draped with a ragged eagle, a banner flapping limp in the breeze. There are maybe 24 of them, though they carry themselves like twice that, Their armour doesn't match. Some wear boiled leather, others dented bronze. A few march barefoot, their feet wrapped in cloth or nothing at all. Only half wear helmets. One wears a cooking pot with the handle ripped off. They're Roman, they say. You want to believe it. You want to see some trace of order, of civilization, of the old stories about discipline and protection and the firm hand of justice. But what you see are hungry men with cracked lips and rotting teeth, eyes darting like cornered dogs. Their commander is missing 2 fingers and rides a horse so thin it stumbles when it stops. When he speaks, it's Latin technically, but clipped and slurred with something else. You hear German, you hear Greek, you hear words that aren't words at all. They don't ask who's in charge. They don't gather survivors to take a report. They don't offer help. They set up camp in the centre of town like it belongs to them, and maybe it does now. A few locals go out to greet them. The soldiers shove them back. One asks for water and gets laughed at. Another offers bread, mouldy, barely edible, and is knocked to the ground. You watch from your doorway, hand resting on the handle of a tool you know wouldn't do much good. That night, they search houses. They say they're looking for weapons, or rebels, or heretics. The excuse changes depending on which soldier kicks the door in. Really, they're looking for food, for anything of value. A necklace, a chicken, a blanket that hasn't been burned. They take what they want. In one house they find a single apple tucked into a pot of grain. They pass it around like a relic, biting into it one after another until there's only pulp. Your neighbour, the one who lost his daughter, is arrested for theft. You watch from across the square as they drag him into the street, blood on his lip. His crime? Digging up a jar of beans from the wreckage of a shop. The shopkeeper is dead. The building is gone. But a soldier shouts about property, about law. They tie his hands behind his back with a belt and drag him toward the camp. No one stops them. No one speaks. You just stand there and try not to meet his eyes. They stay 2 days, maybe 3. It's hard to tell anymore. The nights blend into each other, and the smoke never fully clears. They build no fires. They take what they want and leave behind nothing but footprints and a foul stench. You hear shouting in the night, a woman's voice, then a scuffle, then silence. No one asks questions. On the morning of their departure, the commander stands in the square with a scroll and a list of names. No one understands where he got them. Many are misspelled. Some are already dead. But it doesn't matter. They're conscripting, not volunteers, replacements, bodies. They say Rome still fights the barbarians, that the frontier needs men, that it's your duty. They choose the strong-looking first, what few remain. A boy from down the road, maybe 15, is handed a rusted spear and shoved into line. His mother wails, grabbing at the soldier's cloak. She's knocked to the ground. The boy doesn't speak, just stands there, blank-eyed like someone being marched into a dream. You knew him. Not well. You'd given him fish once, years ago. He'd smiled then. They don't take you, not yet. Maybe you look too thin. Maybe your eyes say too much. Maybe they're just in a hurry. They give the boy a tunic that doesn't fit, and no shoes. The soldiers march out of town by mid-morning. The banner trails low. The wind doesn't bother to lift it. He doesn't turn around. When they're gone, they leave behind scraps, broken tools, empty sacks, a lice-infested cloak curled near the well, stiff with dried sweat. You take it anyway. It's better than nothing. Your neighbour, the one arrested for theft, is never seen again. Maybe they took him too. Maybe he's still tied to a tree somewhere, watching the flies circle his hands. You don't ask. You don't look. Rome came and took and left you with less. You go to the temple because there's nowhere else left to go. Not out of piety. Not anymore. It's not even really a temple now. Just one of the few buildings that still has 4 standing walls and part of a roof. You tell yourself you're looking for shelter, or food, or signs of anyone who knows what comes next. But you know the real reason. It's habit. A ritual without meaning, but still too old to quit. The temple used to feel larger. When you were a child, The ceiling arched like a sky, and the columns were pillars of strength. Not just stone, but something more. Solid, permanent. Now the ceiling leaks, and the cracks run through the marble like veins in a dying hand. The door hangs crooked on one hinge. You push it open and step inside. It creaks like it's warning you not to bother. The air inside is stale, damp with the memory of incense and abandonment. Light filters through a hole in the roof, painting a dull square across the floor. Everything smells of mould and rat droppings. The altar stands as it always has, square and solemn, but the statue of Jupiter that once loomed above it is gone. Just the pedestal remains, empty, chipped where someone must have tried to pry it loose. You walk up to it, slowly, half expecting someone to shout at you, to stop you, to remind you you're not supposed to be here alone. But no one does. The priest is gone. He left months ago, if not longer. One morning he simply stopped showing up. No one noticed until someone went to light the altar lamp and found the oil jugs missing. The scriptures scattered like bird droppings across the floor. No message, no farewell. Maybe he joined a caravan, or took up arms, or wandered off into the woods with a satchel of bread and fading conviction. You wonder if he ever really believed the things he said. You wonder if anyone did. The altar is cold, you touch it, and it feels like stone should. Hard, indifferent, completely unaware that its purpose has passed. You don't light a candle. There aren't any left. And even if there were, you don't see the point. You kneel out of instinct, not reverence, and when your knees touch the dusty floor, a rat skitters across the offering table like it owns the place. It pauses to sniff at a dried smear, something that might have once been wine or blood or both. Then it disappears into the shadows, behind the broken pews. You sit back and look around. The mosaics on the far wall are mostly intact, though faded. Jupiter hurling a lightning bolt, Mars in full armour, Fortuna blindfolded, her wheel tipped just slightly off-centre. You used to stare at that one for hours. Now you barely glance at it. You feel nothing. Not rage, not grief, not even disappointment. Just the empty hum of having expected it all along. That's the worst part. Not the desecration. Not the filth or the silence or the gnawing sense that the gods left and took the warmth with them. The worst part is how normal it feels. You expected to feel blasphemous, maybe even ashamed, but standing here, where divine voices were once supposed to echo, all you feel is tired. You wander to the back room, the one the priest used to keep locked. The door's gone now. Inside, the shelves are mostly bare. One clay vessel lies shattered on the floor, its contents long since eaten by rats or time. A faded robe, once white, lies folded on a bench, stiff with dust and age. You find a drawer half open, and inside it, something small, heavy and misshapen. You pull it out and hold it to the light. It's a statue, or was, a minor god maybe. No label, no altar, just a little figure carved from soft stone, its face worn smooth, one arm broken off at the elbow. You can't even tell if it's male or female. It's small enough to fit in your palm, and heavier than it looks. You carry it with you as you leave. Outside, the cold has settled in for the day. The smoke from the recent fires has mostly cleared, but the air still smells of rot and burnt linen. You pass the abandoned home slowly, running your thumb along the worn stone of the little statue as you go. You know it isn't holy anymore. You're not even sure it ever was, but the weight of it in your hand feels real, solid, like something that might burn if you needed it to. When you reach your house, you break off the statue's remaining arm with a stone. The limb snaps clean. You toss it into the fire pit, and it smoulders faintly. The torso goes next. You watch as it blackens and crumbles, giving off a thin, acrid smoke that stings your eyes. It smells like surrender. You burn the statue and feel nothing. The gods are gone or hiding, or never real to begin with. For days after, the temple stays empty, and you avoid passing it, not because you fear punishment, but because it feels like walking through your own memory. Then, just as the wind begins to turn colder and your stores begin to shrink again, another holy man arrives. This time, not from the old order, but from something newer, hungrier, and far more alive. He arrives with no fanfare. Just a creaking cart, a dull-eyed mule, and a wooden cross hung around his neck with frayed cord. No soldiers, no parade, just one man, too thin for his robe and too clean for the road he must have travelled. You see him from a distance first, walking alongside the mule, whispering something into the animal's ear like it understands him. The village watches without approaching. Everyone's seen enough strangers by now to know not to expect much. Still, he sets up near the old fountain, the one that no longer gives water, but still marks the centre of what's left. He spreads a coarse cloth on a flat stone and begins placing loaves on it. Actual loaves, barley from the look of them. Rough and dense and far from fresh, but bread. Real bread. It draws people in like smoke draws wasps. Hunger is louder than suspicion. He speaks softly. Not like the old priest who used to shout his sermons over coughing children and barking dogs. This man speaks like a funeral. Quiet, slow, and meant to be listened to. He says he is a bishop, that he was sent from a city you've never heard of to help reclaim lost souls and plant the seeds of rebirth. He talks about Christ. Not the Roman Christ from the painted tiles you remember in the wealthier towns, but something heavier, rougher. He says this Christ is not an emperor, but a shepherd, that the empire must die for salvation to begin. No one argues, no one even moves. There's something about him, part calm, part something else, something dangerous in how certain he sounds. You've lived long enough to know that anyone who speaks with that much certainty probably doesn't care who starves along the way. Still, when he picks up the first loaf and tears it in half, your stomach tightens. He says the bread is a gift, that it is freely given, as Christ freely gave himself. You hear mutters from the crowd. One woman crosses herself, twice just to be sure. Someone spits and walks away, but most stay. They're too hungry to leave principle between their ribs. You stand near the back, unsure if you count as a participant or an observer. You've seen what gods are worth in this world. The statue in your fire pit is still blackened at the edges, but when the bishop looks in your direction, he doesn't smile. He just nods once like he already knows your answer. When your turn comes, he hands you a half loaf. His fingers are pale but warm. You nod, unsure of what else to do. The bread is heavier than it looks, wrapped in a scrap of cloth that smells like dust and sage. You step aside, pressing it to your chest. You don't eat it right away. That would feel wrong, or maybe just too fast. He preaches again the next morning, and the next. Each time more people gather. Some listen, some just wait for the bread. He doesn't seem to mind. His sermons drift between metaphors and warnings. He speaks of death as birth, of suffering as passage, of the empire as a sickness finally shaking itself apart. He doesn't mention Jupiter, or Mars, or Rome really. Not the Rome you know. He talks about the kingdom, about a body not of men but of spirit, and how it cannot burn. You attend your first sermon on the third day, not just to watch, to listen. Properly. You sit on a rock near the edge of the clearing, the bread already eaten, your hands empty. He's mid-sentence when you arrive, comparing the soul to a seed beneath winter soil. His voice is low, but it carries. There's a rhythm to it like breath or exhaustion. He speaks like a man who's seen the world end and decided to keep talking anyway. You try to follow, you really do, but the metaphors twist, the theology loops, and your thoughts wander. You think about your sister, coughing in her sleep, about your father, sharpening a broken blade each night like it might become whole again. You think about the statue's hand cracking in the fire, about the taste of the bread, chewy, bitter, and inexplicably warm. You don't understand the sermon. But when he offers another half loaf at the end, you take it. You hold it tighter than you meant to. And when you get home and break it in half to share with your sister, you find yourself crying without quite knowing why. Not loud, just quietly. Like something letting go, it's not a choice really. By the time the bishop announces the next round of baptisms, you've gone 3 days without a full meal, and your sister has started talking in her sleep. Nonsense words mostly, broken by soft gasps like she's forgotten how to breathe. Your father says he won't kneel to any new god, not after the last one's turned to soot. Your mother says nothing, just stares out the window with her hands folded tight around nothing. You decide on your own. The bishop sets up beside the ruined chapel, where the grass grows tall and the old gods are fading from the stones. He builds a makeshift font from a cracked basin and fills it with water drawn from a nearby stream. It's clean enough by current standards. He blesses it with quiet words and a piece of driftwood shaped like a cross. The wine, such as it is, comes from a bottle with no label and a cork that crumbles in his hand. You're the third one that day. The two before you go quickly. A young woman with missing teeth who clutches a child to her hip, and a boy no older than 10 who looks like he hasn't slept since the last frost. They're dunked, marked, blessed. Each receives a scrap of bread, a thimble of wine, and a whispered promise that they are now part of something eternal. Neither looks convinced. When your turn comes, the bishop asks your name. You give it. Though your voice cracks halfway through, he presses a damp cloth to your forehead and mutters a Latin phrase that sounds familiar but hollow. The water is cold and it stings where it touches the cuts on your hands. He raises a chipped cup and dribbles wine down your throat. It tastes like vinegar and dirt. You swallow anyway. You say the words. Not because you believe, but because everyone else is watching. You mouth the prayer, recite the creed as best you remember it, and nod when asked if you accept Christ as your salvation. You've accepted worse for less. The bishop gives you a thin blanket, a crust of bread, and a folded piece of parchment with ink already smudged by the bishop's damp hands. You're told to keep it, that the words inside will guide your soul. You don't read Latin, and the paper's too fragile to use as kindling, so you tuck it into your coat. It feels like you've traded your dignity for a few hours of warmth and a sliver of crust, and frankly, that seems fair. Back at the church tent, they let you sit near the fire. It's real fire, not just coals and prayers. You sit beside a man who doesn't speak, and a woman who mutters a blessing before each bite of food. You chew slowly. The bread is stale but dense, and your stomach protests after the first few bites. Still, you finish it. You'd finish anything. After a while, you wonder. The bishop is occupied with another group, his hands raised, his voice low and steady. No one's watching you. You slip into the storage tent behind the makeshift altar. The flap isn't even tied shut. Inside, crates of barley, a stack of dried fish wrapped in linen, and a pile of poorly folded tunics, smelling of mould and smoke. You take a small loaf and a bit of dried meat. Nothing extravagant. Nothing that would be missed. You tell yourself it's not theft, not really. They say everything here belongs to the faithful now, and you're technically among them. You return home at dusk. Your sister is curled on the floor, face pale, lips chapped. You break off half the bread and press it into her hands. She doesn't speak. She just eats, slow and careful. Your father watches from the corner, eyes narrow. Your mother blesses herself in silence and turns away. The blanket smells like mildew, but it's warm. The parchment rustles softly when you shift, tucked near your ribs. You fall asleep without praying. You dream of nothing and wake up hungry. You hear a new emperor's name spoken in the village square. You don't remember who says it, just that the sound is unfamiliar, heavy with consonants, the kind of name that's easier to swallow than pronounce. It comes from a traveller's mouth, along with stories of a victory somewhere to the east, or maybe a revolt crushed in a place no one here could find on a map. The name is spoken again later that day by the bishop, tucked into a prayer about divine order. You try to remember it. By nightfall, it's gone. You stop feeling guilty about forgetting. It happens more and more. New names arrive like fog and vanish just as fast. They blur together, one syllable bleeding into another, the borders of memory eroding like riverbanks in spring. A man named Petronius, or maybe Severinus, was in power 2 harvests ago, or perhaps that was last year. The man before him was either murdered or made a saint, depending on which trader you ask. One swears there were 2 emperors at once for a while, ruling from different cities and pretending the other didn't exist. Someone else claims there were 3. You nod, but you stop listening. The courier still comes sometimes, or someone calling himself a courier, though his robe is patched and his scrolls are damp and creased, and the seal on his satchel looks like it was painted in a hurry by someone who'd only heard about eagles from memory. He brings proclamations, declarations, announcements of victory, of new taxes, of divine favour and imperial gratitude. He reads them aloud in the square, with stiff ceremony, while goats chew weeds behind him and a child throws rocks at the well. The news is always months old, often older. A battle won in spring announced in autumn. A new law for a city that was sacked before the ink dried. A wedding, a coronation, a decree, all delivered to a crowd that has no bread and no patience. No one responds. The courier reads, bows, and walks on. You doubt he'll come back next time. You find an old coin under a floor tile one morning while patching a draft. The face is nearly worn smooth, just the faint outline of a man's profile. Barely a man anymore, just the ghost of a nose and half a laurel wreath. The inscription around the edge is mostly gone, a swirl of half letters and scratches. You show it to your mother. She turns it over, squints and shrugs. Could be anyone, she says. The newer coins are worse, thin, light, bent at the edges. They snap under pressure and tarnish after a single storm. You get one once in exchange for a basket of foraged mushrooms. It has a crude face and no name, just a mark that might be a star, or a wheel, or an animal. You try to use it the next day, and the woman at the stall laughs and throws it into the mud. You leave it there, sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep. You try to name the emperors you've lived through. You can't. Not really. They come and go like clouds. The bishop still prays for them by title. Our emperor, he says, and leaves it vague, safer that way. Easier too. You don't think anyone here could tell you where the emperor actually rules from anymore. Rome, Ravenna, Constantinople. One of the places on the other side of the world where the roads still shine and the statues still have faces. You bury a letter that week. It's from your cousin, the one who left years ago with the caravan headed south. You kept her letter tucked in a cloth pouch, sealed and unread, not because you didn't want to know what it said, but because knowing would make it real. You finally open it one evening by firelight, half expecting nothing but empty parchment. But the words are still there, faded, blurred at the edges, but legible enough. She talks about a town with walls, about orchards that still bloom, about priests who give sermons in clear Latin, and children who still sing the old songs. She says she found work mending clothes and that she might send for you soon. You hold the letter for a long time after reading it. Then you fold it, walk outside, and bury it beneath a sycamore stump behind the house. It's not that you don't believe her, it's that you can't afford to. By the time the next traveller comes through, you don't ask for news. Someone says there's been another change in leadership. Someone else says the Vandals have taken Carthage, or that Carthage was never taken, only traded. You don't care. You nod, stir your stew, and listen without listening. There's nothing left to track. Nothing left to mark the rise and fall. The banners fade, the names blur, the victories are always too far away. You've stopped carving dates into the lintel. You've stopped asking what day it is, so you're still alive. That's enough. Your sister starts coughing in early autumn, when the mornings begin to bite, and the nights hang heavier than before. At first, it's the kind of cough you've both had 100 times. Sharp, dry, harmless. But it lingers, deepens, turns wet. Her voice grows hoarse, her face too flushed for comfort. She stops singing to herself. That's when you know it's serious. You try everything you've learned from the old ways. Steam from boiling herbs, warm cloths across her chest, bits of dried root dissolved in water. You even offer the last of the wine the bishop gave you, though she turns her face away. Your mother finds an old charm tucked in the bottom of a box and ties it to your sister's wrist. She doesn't say what it's for, just mutters something and pulls the blanket tighter. There are no doctors anymore. Just guesses and prayers. Some people in the village say it's just the season, that the air is cursed or the wind carries sickness now. Others say it's punishment or bad blood. You've stopped listening. Your sister's skin is hot to the touch and damp with sweat even when the room is cold. Her breaths come fast and shallow. You sit by her through the nights, listening to the rasp in her chest, the way her body shakes with each breath, like it's trying to escape itself. You don't remember the last thing she said. Something small, probably. A joke, a question. Maybe she asked for water. You were tired and your thoughts were somewhere else. On firewood, on mouldy grain, on the wind pushing against the shutters like it wanted in. You wish you'd paid more attention, but regrets are a luxury now, like butter or shoes without holes. When she dies, it's quiet. Your mother doesn't scream. She just sits down, slow and careful, like she's afraid the sound of her own grief might break something else. You take your sister's hand, it's still warm, and hold it until it's not. Your father kneels by the hearth with his back to you both. He doesn't move. The house feels impossibly still, like the world outside has paused just long enough for your grief to take root before it resumes. You find the shovel without speaking. It's leaning against the side of the house, handle warped from rain and time. The ground behind the barn is softer than most places. Used to be a garden, back when seeds mattered. You dig. The soil comes up in clumps and stones bite your hands, even through the calluses. You don't stop. You don't even slow down. Sweat stings your eyes. You welcome the distraction. When the hole is ready, your mother wraps the body. She doesn't ask for help. The cloth is too thin for a shroud, but she folds it with care, smoothing the corners, like she used to do with laundry in quieter years. She tucks a piece of twine doll into the bundle, one your sister made last spring from frayed rope and a feather. You remember her laughing as she held it up and said it could fly. You didn't believe her then. You almost do now. You carry the bundle yourself. Your arms are stronger than they were a year ago, but it still feels heavy. Not physically, not really, just in the way that things do when you know you'll never lift them again. You lay her down gently and step back. Your mother kneels for a moment and places one hand on the dirt. Then she rises and walks away. You cover the grave in silence. No priest, no prayer, just earth returning to earth. You press it flat and smooth the edges with the shovel. Then you sit beside it until the sun begins to drop behind the hills. The next day, the wind returns. Your mother doesn't speak. Not out of defiance, just absence. Her voice is gone. Hollowed out. She moves through the house like a ghost, doing what needs doing with her eyes on the floor. Your father tries to say something once, but the words collapse halfway through, and he goes back to sharpening the same dull blade he hasn't used in months. You don't mark the grave. You think about it, but there's nothing to carve with, nothing worth writing. And besides, it's not like anyone would come looking for her name. You pass the spot every day now. Sometimes you stop, sometimes you don't. The stone you placed at the head of the grave shifts a little more with each rainfall, sinking slowly into the dirt. You press it back down, not because it changes anything, but because it feels wrong to let it sink too far too fast. You don't dream of her. You wish you did. But the dreams are gone now too. He tells you while chewing on a frostbitten turnip, barely looking up as he says it. The traveller. The one who showed up 2 nights ago, limping and hollow-eyed with a patched boot and stories to trade for fire and stew. You didn't ask much, just where he'd come from and whether the roads behind him were passable. He gave vague answers. Everyone does now. But this he offers without prompting. He says Rome has fallen. You wait for more, but he just shrugs and keeps chewing. Eventually, he adds that it was sacked again, this time by people who didn't even bother to paint themselves as liberators. Vandals, maybe, or Goths again, or just another desperate army with new flags and old hungers. He doesn't say when it happened. Could have been months ago, could have been yesterday. It doesn't matter. Time doesn't travel like it used to. You nod, not because it surprises you, just because that's the polite thing to do when someone offers you a funeral. Later, sitting outside your hut, you try to picture the city, Rome, as it was once described to you by a travelling priest who claimed to have seen it with his own eyes. Great domes and marble pillars, streets so clean you could eat from them, fountains that ran without stopping, statues taller than trees, an empire of stone and order and law stretched out under the hand of men who knew how to rule. You've never seen a place like that. You don't believe it ever existed. The Rome you know is a story people tell when they don't want to talk about the world as it is. Like the gods, like justice, like spring coming early. You've seen maps once, crude charcoal things scrawled on cloth or bark. They showed rivers that flowed straight, borders that held, names written in bold Latin script. But the rivers flood, and the borders bleed, and the names change faster than the wind. What's left isn't Rome. It's what happens after. The traveller tells someone else the same news the next day. You overhear him repeating it, this time with more detail. There was fire, looting, maybe a bishop thrown from a window. The crowd murmurs. One woman crosses herself. Another says it was bound to happen. Someone else spits in the dirt and calls it justice. You say nothing. You stop going to the sermons. The bishop preaches like he's shouting into a hole, promising salvation through ruin, resurrection through collapse. He says Rome's fall is proof that God is moving, that the kingdom is being born in the ashes, that the empire must die so the soul can be free. You'd listen maybe if it meant more bread. You spend most days near the field. What's left of it? The soil is tired, just like everything else. You rake the dead stalks into piles and burn them without ceremony. The smoke barely rises. You plant less now, knowing the yield will disappoint you. The barley doesn't come up straight. The beans rot at the roots. You find yourself growing weeds on purpose because some of them, at least, don't mind the cold. You sit outside the hut, wrapped in your sister's old blanket, watching the frost creep across the edge of the field. The sky's grey, not with storm, just with indifference. Your hands are cracked, your knees ache. You pull the fabric tighter and breathe through your mouth because your nose hasn't worked properly since last winter. Somewhere behind you, your mother coughs in her sleep. You were never a senator. You never wore a toga, never debated in marble halls, never stood on a balcony and watched legions march in your name. You've never seen an aqueduct that still carried water, never stepped into a building without counting the cracks before you entered. You don't know what glory is supposed to feel like, but you're sure it doesn't smell like mildew and burnt chaff. You were a peasant. Still are, probably. Though even the word feels old now. You never saw the rise, just the long, slow collapse. The gutters cracking one stone at a time. The gods slipping into silence. The soldiers forgetting their lines. You saw the eagle fade from the banners. The statues crumble from the inside. The coins lose their names and their weight. You heard the empire die in a dozen different ways. None of them loud, none of them fast. They say Rome fell, you already knew. You've been watching it fall your entire life, and all you ever saw was the dust. That brings us to the end of tonight's slow collapse. Not just of a man, but of an empire unravelling in silence. If you're still listening, thank you for staying through the ash and the quiet. History tends to remember the names at the top, but this story, like so many others, belonged to someone forgotten long before the fall. If you'd like early access to more quietly devastating stories like this one, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with other historical topics you'd like to see covered. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Amanda Lamke. Sleep well.